Hello and welcome to the New City Podcast, where we exist to renew the Quad Cities by restoring the health of its people. I'm Jarek Bakken.
I'm Dr. Alex Aguello.
Today, principle number 3. The human body needs to have times of feasting on and fasting from food in order to survive and thrive. What we're saying here is the second most important thing when we are expounding upon how the human body obtains health is timing of when you're eating, and maybe more importantly, when you're not eating.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're trying to just make this argument for what we believe is the best way for people to eat, or kind of a nutrition plan, or if you want to use the term diet. So yes, the number one thing is what you're eating, and that goes back to the real food stuff. Mm-hmm. But before we can get to kind of the maybe secondary issues to what you're actually eating and why you should be doing that, it's important, but it's also something that many people don't even think about or talk about when they're actually teaching on nutrition. Yeah. And that's the timing of eating, meaning the human body was kind of designed to have times where they are, yes, filling their body with nutrients, but then there's also times where you shouldn't be doing that, because now the body needs to use those nutrients, it needs to store those nutrients, it needs to process through those nutrients in order to actually function. So you have to give the body a break from actually ingesting food. And people naturally do this. I mean, there's obviously times where we're sleeping. Sure. And we're not eating when we're sleeping. Although when people are trying to gain weight, one of the things that they do is wake up in the middle of the night and put more food in their body.
Like babies.
Sure. Exactly. So it's kind of common sense, right? It should just be intuitive that this is the case. But it's also kind of a reaction to what we have been doing for so long in our culture when it comes to food and how much we eat, how often we eat. We need to make a big change there.
Right. So one of the first things people probably think of is, like, you know, what has become uncommon now is, you know, you might have been told at some time in your life, you know, don't eat a snack, you're going to spoil your dinner, right? Yeah. Like, there's definitely that aspect that I think has gone away. But I think if we even that was probably mostly like a moment in time, right? If we look back even further, more to a long period of time of how people would have eaten, right? Like, I don't know when, like, the refrigerator was invented or the microwave or whatever, but it's like, these are new things that have allowed us access to food basically at any given moment, right? For many, many, many years, like, eating was done when food was available, and you didn't have to put any more thought into that. Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, back to just a historical perspective on this, is for thousands of years, people were forced into fasting. You know, they didn't just have minutes between their meals or hours. They had days between when they were actually going to eat. And a lot of people, you know, this would be more like the paleo crowd, would say that what you were referencing there changed when people started kind of settling and they weren't hunter-gatherers and kind of nomads where they were roaming all over the place, where they kind of settled and started to farm, because then because they were making their food, they had food available then. But they were also not eating all the time because they had to work a lot of the time.
Right. And even that, like, even having, let's call it corn in the backyard, like, that's wildly different than corn pops in the cupboard. Right. Like, you can go from a moment of, I want something to eat, to it being in my mouth, like corn on the stalk in the field, like going to edible in front of you. Like, there's a process in between there of beneficial things for digestion, right? But like this is another thing that's just contributing to the problem.
Right. So yeah, it's just kind of the food around you as far as being available to grab out of your garden or out of your fields that you were farming versus food just being in your pantry.
Yeah.
It's in a bag or a box that you can grab immediately, but also other lifestyle factors of people had to work all the time, so they weren't just sitting there eating all day long, watching TV, that type of stuff, So there's a huge difference in people. So I would say yes, once we became more and more industrialized, once we started moving from more active type jobs, more farming type jobs to more sitting in front of a computer all day long, or, where you have the break room and you can snack all day long, or you can bring snacks to, obviously once they started to make processed food where you can just take it with you all the time, that's when a lot of this stuff changed.
Right. So essentially, I think we have to start with what is perceptively, what is normal for, we'll just say the American, as far as food timing, and then what we think is a lot more normal and natural to the human body.
Yeah. For Americans, the normal thing is at least eating 3 meals, but then you're also grazing throughout the day.
Right.
So I think they say the average American eats anywhere from 6 to 10 times a day. That's a lot of food. So that gets into the whole, you're eating too much food as far as quantity of food, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about with the food timing. It's how often you are eating. Because remember, it's not necessarily the problem. I mean, it is a problem, you putting food into your body as far as too much. But remember, if the body's working normally, then it's going to have those satiety mechanisms. It's going to tell you to stop eating when it has been nourished and it has enough even of calories, because you're going to be full. But when you do that and then you wait a little bit and you do it again, you wait a little bit and do it again, you are stimulating hormonal processes in your body, you're stimulating digestive processes in your body, and you're just doing something again that the body has not been used to doing for the history of civilization. So you're introducing something new by doing that. So it's more of a how often are you putting things in your body and requiring your body to respond and adapt and work, versus it being kind of if you look at the whole day, because I ate so often, I ate too much. Yeah, that can be a problem, but that's not necessarily the major problem that we're thinking about.
Right. They're we could literally be talking about if we took a whole day's worth of food, right? We set it on this table right here. 2 times of it, right? And I ate all of it at once. And you came back to this table, whatever, at any point you wanted to throughout the day. What happens in my body and what happens in your body is wildly different, even though it was the exact same food. Right. Because then, we could even get into, what we kind of talked about in the last episode. If one of the things on here was a little cup of honey, right? And when you ate the honey, you ate that and nothing else. And when I ate the honey, it was amidst all this other stuff, right? That alone is going to have a different effect on you than it does on me, right? Like there's this whole world of actually, just what we eat is not the whole picture.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So, and the reason that that's the case, of why it's become a problem, is back to what we mentioned a little bit in the last one, is that whole insulin sensitivity, versus insulin resistance stuff. When we do the 6 to 10 meals, when we do the grazing throughout the day, we are working against insulin sensitivity and working for insulin resistance. We're making our bodies more insulin resistant, meaning the body turns on the hormone insulin so often that it's kind of always on. And insulin is a storage hormone, so you're going to store nutrients and not utilize nutrients to the highest degree. Therefore, this is why people gain weight, and this is why people put fat into, or build fat into their organs and different tissues, and and leads to metabolic disease. So the when you eat and how often you are eating is a big deal.
Yeah. So the reason why it's a problem to eat all the time, right? The reason why we have to actually say something about this is because when you do, there are pretty massive negative side effects.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest one being high insulin, high blood sugar, and the whole cascade of chronic disease that is associated with that.
Yeah. And again, it's pretty easy to understand. We could talk about the insulin thing. We could talk about inflammation. We could talk about your digestive system. If your body doesn't do well digesting food, if you have digestive problems, bloating, gassiness, diarrhea, constipation, all this stuff that people deal with digestive issues, should be pretty easy to understand. You're going to do better. You're going to have less symptoms if you don't eat,
right,
versus eating.
Right.
If inflammation is a problem, and we know inflammation can come from what you're eating,
mm-hmm.
you're going to have less inflammation if you're not eating versus eating. And then insulin, if insulin is a problem for you, if you eat, you're going to trigger insulin because insulin reacts to what you eat. So if you're not eating, then insulin's not going to react to what you eat. Therefore, it's going to come down. So the major argument here is, if we just even look at those three things, those are probably three of the bigger things that are happening with people's health. The less we eat, the less often we eat, the more those things are able to come down and start to heal. Where our bodies are going to start to heal.
Right.
Our bodies are going to start to get back to functioning normally. We're not saying that you should be doing that all the time, right? That's why the principle is there's times of feasting and fasting.
Right.
But if you fast very little and you're feasting too much, now you're getting away from that first principle of giving the body what it needs to stay away from what it doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so, to the first point about, like, if you've got problems associated with eating, you're going to feel better when you don't eat. Like, super true in my experience, right? So before I kind of had any grasp on what's really going on with my body, I would have easily said, how do I feel the best? When I freaking don't eat anything.
Yeah.
Right? And problems come after I eat, right? Wasn't really clued into what those things were, and honestly just the blind idea that fasting was good, eating was bad, can potentially cause other problems when you're adding in other factors like exercise and stuff. But, like, as a general rule, I was feeling significantly better if there was no food involved.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, it should make sense to people.
Right.
But it is, people like to eat, and it's kind of just become normal in our society, so it's tough to be countercultural a lot of times.
So that's definitely, like, I think, kind of defining that there's a problem and we need to move away from the problem. But, like, we also need to eat. We have to eat. So it's not just that, hey, we want to tell people that fasting is good. It's like, we need to understand both when to eat, as far as how to do that when you do, but then also when not to, right? So the fact that, like, actually how you treat eating, and what we're calling here feasting, is a really, really, really big part of this, right? So I think I probably said this a few times, but food is quite possibly the only addictive substance that people deal with addiction in this realm of food. Only addictive substance that you can't just avoid for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. You can't just treat it like alcohol and substances, and like the solution is to never touch it again. The solution with food is we have to figure out how to feast well. right? We have to figure out how to deal with food well. So, yeah, what do we mean by feasting?
I mean, it's legitimately that's the time when you're putting food in your body. So it gets back to, the whole real food thing. One of the arguments for real food is because that includes the most nutrients. It's how your body it's going to absorb the most amount of nutrients out of those particular foods. We feast because our bodies need to be nourished if we're going to function, if we're going to, what we say, survive and thrive. Things that happen in our body require nutrients, right? They require what are called macronutrients, and they also require what are called micronutrients, and we'll get into that in future episodes. But you can't avoid those things for an extended period of time in order to stay healthy.
Right.
And obviously there's a I don't know what you'd say there. Some people can because they've eaten enough of it over the course of their time, where they have it stored on their body.
Right.
But you especially the micronutrient content, you have to have those continually coming in your body because your body's always using them.
Yeah.
So you couldn't just fast all the time. You wouldn't be able to survive, and you definitely wouldn't thrive.
Yeah. So I think the difference, the major difference between something like alcohol or a drug is that really any amount of those things is what we would classify as toxic. Right?
Yeah.
Any amount of those things is going to be negative for the body. With food, the negative actually only comes when we cross a certain threshold, right? Food is actually inherently good and really necessary, right? We have to figure out how to take food and actually receive it as good, right? Because we can't, you can't vilify food at all, right? In general, because actually the majority of it is good and necessary. We have to figure out how to deal with it and accept it and use it and, have it be a part of our life in this good way and not cross this threshold to where actually this becomes really, really bad.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there has to be a balance there. That's what we're saying in this principle. There has to be a balance of nourishing your body well, but also staying away from that because you don't want to overly stimulate the body.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I often tell folks I'm working with nutritionally is when we are trying to dial in our daily nutrition practices, essentially what we're doing is we are practicing the diet of the person we want to become, right? Your current diet that led you to a place that you were unhappy with, right? Led you to a place that was unhealthy, right? You are well versed and well practiced in the diet that creates that person, right? So what we're trying to do, and I think we'll get into this, but we're not using the methods of calorie restriction to, let's give you as little as possible so you can get to a certain place as fast as possible, right? There's many, many reasons why we completely disagree with that, and maybe this is the time to get into that. But what we actually want to do is say, no. Let's figure out what would be healthy for you, what a healthy diet does look like for you, and we are going to practice that. We're going to practice the diet that is going to be sustainable for you for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to waste our time trying to figure out the lowest amount of calories that you can feed yourself to, still stay alive, right? And, your progress to the number on the scale is going to be faster. Completely disagree with that, and for very good reason, because there's so many negative side effects of that. What we're saying is we want to teach you how to feast, right? How to eat well, how to feed your body well with real foods and in a way that is going to support, the health and support the body composition that we determine would be healthy, you know, for your frame and activity and all this stuff, right?
Right.
It's like we're practicing that. And over time, you're going to become that person.
Yeah.
Right? Then we can kind of introduce this idea of fasting. And you know what? If you want to get there faster, cool. Let's talk about fasting. Right?
Yeah. 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 So, I mean, it should be, there should be some time of avoiding the feasting, you know, so what we're defining as fasting.
Yeah.
And everybody's, that's how everybody should be functioning.
Sure.
But for people who have specific goals, especially if weight loss or reversing metabolic disease, if there is digestive stuff going on, if there is inflammation going on, there's times where you can actually use fasting therapeutically as well, meaning there's a problem here and we want to kind of speed up the healing process.
Yeah.
We can extend out the number of hours that you would actually be fasting.
Right. So when we say the human body needs times of feasting on and fasting from food, specifically looking at, you know, the balance between these two things, and for most people that's going to be the extended periods of fasting, right? Like for starters, for everybody, we're talking about the daily kind of, we might call time restriction of when you're eating, right? That you're not grazing all day long, right? That you have a designated meal time, and the time between that meal time and your next meal time, you're actually not eating, right?
Yeah.
That is absolutely one aspect of this. But what we're also talking about is these longer periods that you might more commonly like think of as a fast, right? We're saying yes to that too, right?
Right.
So what's the big, besides just understanding the amount of time between your eating is longer, what's the biggest difference between just the idea that, hey, we shouldn't be eating all day long, and actually having days, plural, going to sleep without having eaten anything all day long? Like, we're saying that's also beneficial. What's the difference there?
Yeah, so the first one where you're just kind of taking time between your meals, you want to just get into that daily rhythm, because things from a hormonal perspective, again, things from a digestive perspective, and then how inflammation plays into it. You know, when you have times where you're eating, things are going to be turned on, so your body's going to respond, but then you want time for that to come down and your body to get back to kind of a more homeostatic state of function before you put something else in it where it then has to respond again. So that's just something naturally, normally that should happen. When you do that for an extended period of time, not only are you allowing those things to kind of, those things to be magnified, those things are coming down a lot, but then also other processes in the body start to be stimulated. So when you avoid food for a significant amount of time and you've kind of gotten past the stored nutrients that are easy to grab, so what's called glycogen, or what, again, that glucose word, sugar, gets stored in our body as glycogen. When we kind of use that, then now our body has to say, well, if I'm going to survive, then now I need to produce some other form of energy. And one of the more popular things that people know about is what are called ketones. So the body says, okay, I've used this form of energy, and now I'm going to start producing these ketone things that my body can also use for energy. And they're just starting to study that more and more and seeing that there's a bunch of beneficial processes that happen when your body produces ketones, how they're very healing for the brain. The brain can utilize them versus using sugar, and there's less waste that happens when you kind of take them through that process. So you can get a good cognitive bump as far as getting rid of brain fog and kind of stimulating your memory, stimulating your cognitive function. Those type of things can happen. But then there's also this process that the body goes through called autophagy, which is basically there's a bunch of just broken down cells or broken down pieces of cells that have been damaged throughout life, back to that free radical stuff that we talked about, or oxidative stress. When you don't eat, the body's like, okay, well, if you're not going to eat, then I'm going to use my energy for other purposes. And you start to then go around and clear those things up. You start to get rid of some of the broken down stuff, and you either completely get rid of them or you repair them and you make them into stuff that your body can use.
Yeah.
So that's a form of healing. So if you just kind of think the less you eat, the more the increase. So if you think of like inverse, they work inversely here. So the less you eat, the more this healing is actually going to happen. An easy way of understanding this is if you have a dog or any sort of pet, if they're sick, if they're not feeling well, they just intuitively or naturally, innately say, I'm not going to eat. Because they know that their body needs to use its energy for healing, not to digest food, not to respond to what you just put in the body. So you can kind of stimulate that process intentionally by just extending out your diet, even though you're not sick and you don't need necessarily to respond to fighting off a cold or flu or something like that. But you can just get increased healing in the body through this autophagy process. So yeah, those are kind of the two. I don't know if that's exactly what you're
for sure.
talk about.
For sure. That's definitely part of it. How about like tying into what we talked about in the last episode about all of the sugar, right? And then, this whole idea of being, you got into the ketones a little bit, but being sugar dependent and versus, the natural process that literally has to happen when you go not very long without food for you to maintain functioning like normally.
Yep. So when you think about things metabolically, we're supposed to, the normal function would be we can utilize sugar for energy or we can utilize fat for energy, meaning we break down sugar into this glucose, goes into the cells can use that for energy. Or we can break down fats into what are called fatty acids and we can use that for energy. That's the primary two sources of energy that we actually have. And then again, this ketone thing can happen as well. When we are eating 6 to 10 times a day, especially if we're eating high sugar meals, and even if we're eating high sugar, high fat in that combination, we basically become dependent upon sugar, meaning we are primarily sugar burners.
Right.
Therefore, when we've got to that point where we haven't been eating sugar, so we try to fast, our body says, hey, what I use primarily for my energy, I don't have any right now, so it's going to basically force you to go and crave sugar. So we kind of think of that whole thing as a willpower thing. I just like sugar, so I get it. But that's actually a natural response that the body says, I need this energy, so if you want me to survive, you have to go feed me more of this type of energy that I'm used to burning. The primary reason that happens is because of that insulin thing. Insulin is a storage hormone, meaning if insulin is on, if your body has stimulated insulin, then it kind of shuts down your body's ability to utilize energy sources. Why? Because you can't do two things at once. Insulin wants to store energy, not burn energy. So if insulin is always on, chronically on because of poor lifestyle choices, then you can't access the fat stores or you can't become a fat burner, an efficient fat burner for energy. So now you've moved away from normal, right? Our body's supposed to be able to burn energy from sugar and energy from fat. If you shut down one of those sources, then you can only use this source, and you now are in an unhealthy state because you can't burn both of those. You're not what's called metabolically flexible. You can't go to both of those things. So when you fast, because you're not stimulating insulin is allowed to come down. And once it's come down to more of what's called a basal level or normal level, then now you can oxidize fat for energy. Now you can actually burn that fat off of your body that you want to burn. So this is why we would reject just solely the calories in, calories out model. Because if you are eating less calories than you're taking in, that's the same. Did I say that right? If you're taking in less calories than you're burning off type thing, then, people would say, well, therefore I should lose weight because it's all about the calorie model. But if you're doing that, but while insulin is still on, you can't burn off the fat that you want to burn off, right? So you're not going to be able to lose the weight that you want to lose. You might lose some weight. It could be water weight. It could be actually muscle tissue breaking down and losing that type of weight because your body's always going to get to that sugar for energy. So sometimes it could break down protein to get to sugar. You're not losing the weight that you want to because insulin is always on. So maybe you could get to insulin coming down by doing the whole calories in, calories out thing. I think there's somewhat of an argument for that. But the best way to do it is through fasting, because if you're not stimulating insulin, the body's natural response is to get back to homeostasis, and it wants to come back to its normal levels.
Right. So I think there's definitely an aspect to that where, you're probably doing some of the work when you're reducing calories. Like you're inevitably probably reducing insulin somewhat, right? You don't have as much of the signal, especially if you're, not doing the thing where you eat every couple hours or whatever, right? Any form of reduction in calories probably has some corresponding reduction in insulin. So, there's definitely some benefit there, right? And, if you look at the calorie model, like in the short term, it's going to do what it promises to do, right? You eat this number of calories for this many days, you're going to lose this much weight, right? The problem with that comes in is when we actually peel back a layer and see what else is going on under there, right? So one of the studies that I love referencing is looking at somebody who has just a calorie restricted diet, right? They have the same amount of calories 7 days a week, right? They eat this number of calories, and it's a reduced amount from theoretically what would maintain their current body composition, right? And then you have this person who eats every other day. By the end of the week, they have the same number of calories. They've eaten the same number of calories in this kind of restricted state as the person above. By the end of a certain number of weeks, they end up weighing about the same. But when we get into, so what I want to toss back to you is when you look at the basal metabolic rate of those two people, calorie restricted person has lowered.
Yeah.
Fasting person has not.
Right.
And in certain cases actually has increased.
Right.
Right?
Right.
What the heck is this metabolic rate?
Yeah, so the basal metabolic rate is kind of the the set number of calories that your body is used to utilizing for normal function. So think of it like if your body requires 1,000 calories to function normally, then that's...
If you're a newborn.
Yeah. So if that's kind of the way it is, requires 1,000 calories to function normally, then you are... that's how it's going to work, right? So if people think then, well, if I need 1,000 calories to function normally and that's going to kind of maintain my weight, then if I eat less than that, then now I'm going to lose weight because I haven't given it the calories that I need to maintain my weight. Well, how the body responds to that is it says, well, if you're only going to give me 500 calories, then I'm going to start only using 500 calories because that's how I have to function. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to exercise to use some of those calories, then what's going to happen is everything else that typically utilizes calories for energy is going to downregulate its function.
Yep.
And what are those other things? Well, that's your brain, that's your kidneys, that's your heart, that's your liver. That's everything in the body requires energy to function.
Dare we say immune system?
Immune system. So everything requires energy to function, and your body's used to functioning at this level, this basal metabolic rate. It's kind of how it metabolizes things at this rate. That's just how it normally works. So it's going to adapt to the environment that you put it in. That's kind of what basically everything that we teach is about. The body is intelligent. It's going to adapt to the environment that you put it into. So when you reference the people that restrict calories, the basal metabolic rate dropped because it's going to adapt to whatever calories they're giving it on a consistent basis. And you said that the fasting people didn't do that was because you were changing what the body was doing. So the body didn't say, okay, I'm consistently doing this, so I need to adapt. It's saying, okay, I got my 1,000 calories this day, but this day I didn't get any calories. And then the next day you get 1,000 calories. So now you're at least somewhat tricking the body. You're kind of keeping it off guard as far as being able to say, okay, now I can adapt in this particular way. It's not going to change like that.
And you have access to the stored energy on your body. Right? Like, it's not like your body's operating on less, right? You're converting the energy that is stored and being put to use like it's meant to.
Right. So yeah, that's probably the biggest negative effect of the whole calorie restriction thing.
Right.
But even in the context of weight loss, just think about that. If I'm supposed to function at 2,000 calories, I restrict it down to 1,000 calories so that I can lose weight in a fast way. What's my body going to do? My body's going to respond by changing the metabolic rate and making it lower. Well, then I decide, man, I can't continue this diet, so I'm going to go up to 1,500 calories. Well, what's the body going to do at that particular time? Well, now you are in a caloric surplus, so you're for sure going to plateau, or you potentially are, especially if calorie theory works, you are going to start gaining weight.
Right.
And yes, if you do that long term, the body's going to adapt and come back up to 1,500 calories, but now you're not in a state of weight loss.
You've added stored energy on there because your body didn't use it in this process back up to that state.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, man, that's messy. That is messy.
Yep. So the human body should have times of fasting and times of feasting.
For real though. So, if this seems complicated to you, please let us know, and we would love to talk to you and sort through it and help make some sense of it, because it is kind of crazy. It's not as simple as a math equation, right? It is not as simple as what your MyFitnessPal app wants to tell you it is. I'm not dogging on the app. I have lots of people using it because there's lots of good things about it. But it isn't like it's not just math. Your body's not just math. Food isn't math. Do you know that your body doesn't even burn calories at all? Right? There's no such thing as a receptor for a calorie in your body. This is just the unit of measurement that we have come up with to figure out how to talk about this stuff, right? So, unfortunately, it's not the whole picture. Fortunately, there's good news, and there's a way to actually get a grasp on this stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the human body needs times of feasting on and fasting from food in order to survive and thrive. Get after it.
Word.
If you can hear me now, that means you made it all the way through the show, and I have a big old thank you for you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for listening all the way through. We hope this has been helpful for you, educational for you, entertaining for you, whatever it may be. We really value your attention. What we also value is your feedback. So we would love if you could leave us a comment, leave us a review, send us a message, let us know what you think. Let us know if there's any other topics you want to hear us talk about, if there's anybody else you'd like to hear us interview, or you'd like to hear them talk to us about certain things, whatever it may be. We'd love to hear from you, hear your comments, your suggestions, all of it, okay? On Facebook, you can join our group. It is called Renewing the City. Just apply, I don't know, hit join this group, whatever it may be. You got to hit join, and I got to approve you to be in there. But on Instagram, all you got to do is follow. We've got our Principles of Health going up almost every day of the week. Or if you're ready to kind of jump in and really see what it looks like to join us here at the gym, you can go to newcity.fitness/start and schedule time to talk to one of our coaches. Again, we really appreciate you, your time, your attention. Until next time, peace.